You're about to hear about a crime scene so disturbing, so confusing, that even veteran detectives, people who have seen everything, walked out of that house and said the same thing. This doesn't make sense. No signs of forced entry, no clear motive, and details so twisted, they still don't add up years later. The kind of case that keeps investigators awake at night. The kind of case that makes you question what really happened behind closed doors. And by the end of this, you might find yourself doing the same. It started like any other quiet morning in a small American neighborhood. The kind of place where people wave to each other, where nothing ever really happens, until it did. Police received a routine welfare check call. Nothing urgent at first. A coworker said a man hadn't shown up for work. No calls, no texts. Completely out of character. At first, it didn't seem like much. People miss work sometimes. Phones die. Life happens. But something about this felt off. When officers arrived at the house, everything looked normal from the outside. The lawn was trimmed. The mailbox wasn't overflowing. No broken windows. No signs of struggle. Just a quiet home sitting under a calm sky. But the moment they stepped inside, everything changed. The air felt heavy, still, almost like the house itself was holding its breath. And then they saw it. A scene so bizarre, it didn't fit any pattern they had ever studied. This wasn't just a crime. It was a puzzle. The man who lived there, let's call him Daniel, was known as quiet, reliable, and predictable. Mid-40s. Worked a steady job. No criminal record, no known enemies. The kind of person you wouldn't look at twice. The kind of person who blends into the background. Neighbors described him the same way. Nice guy. Kept to himself. Always polite. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But inside that house, something had gone terribly wrong. Furniture was out of place, but not exactly overturned. Items were moved, but not stolen. It looked staged, but also chaotic, like someone had tried to create a scene and then stopped halfway through. And Daniel was found in a position that immediately raised questions, not just about how he died, but about what happened before. There were no obvious signs of forced entry. Doors locked, windows intact, alarm system untouched, which led investigators to one chilling conclusion early on. Whoever was involved was either invited in or already inside. And that's where things started to unravel. As detectives began piecing together Daniel's life, they realized something strange. There were gaps, missing pieces, small details that didn't line up. His phone was there, but certain recent messages were gone. His computer was on, but the browsing history had been partially wiped. Security cameras? Disabled. Not broken, not damaged, just turned off. Someone had been careful, but not careful enough. Because hidden within the house were subtle clues. Things that didn't belong. Things that shouldn't have been there. A glass in the sink, with fingerprints that didn't match Daniel. A chair slightly angled toward the hallway, as if someone had been watching. And one detail that truly unsettled investigators. There were signs that someone had stayed in the house longer than expected. Not just minutes, possibly hours, maybe even overnight, which raised an even darker question. Was Daniel alone when he died? Or had someone been there the entire time? As the investigation deepened, detectives turned their attention to Daniel's routine, his job, his habits, his relationships. And that's when they discovered something that didn't match the image everyone had painted. Daniel wasn't as invisible as people thought. In fact, he had recently been involved in something unusual. A series of late-night phone calls, repeated numbers, unknown contacts. Nothing illegal on the surface, but enough to make investigators pause. Who was he talking to? And why had no one mentioned it? When police tracked down one of the numbers, they hit a dead end. Prepaid phone. No registered owner. No location data. It was like chasing a ghost. But the deeper they dug, the stranger it got. Because Daniel had also made a recent purchase. Something small. Something legal. But completely out of character for him. And it was missing from the house. No receipt, no packaging, just a digital record and a gap where it should have been. Now detectives had more questions than answers. Was this a robbery? It didn't look like one. Was it personal? There were no signs of a struggle that fit that theory. Was it planned? If it was done in a way that defied logic. And then came the first real twist. The autopsy report, what it revealed, changed everything. Because the timeline didn't match. Not the time of death. Not the sequence of events. Not even the position Daniel was found in. It was as if the scene had been altered. Carefully. Intentionally. But why? And by who? Investigators went back to the house, again and again, looking for anything they might have missed. And that's when one detective noticed something small, almost invisible. A mark on the floor. Faint. Easy to overlook. But once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. It suggested movement, not random movement. Deliberate movement. Something or someone had been dragged. But there was no clear starting point, and no clear destination. Just a trail that led nowhere, or at least nowhere obvious. At this point, the case was no longer straightforward. It wasn't even predictable. It was something else entirely. A situation where every answer created two new questions. And the people closest to Daniel? They weren't much help. Not because they refused to talk, but because they genuinely didn't know. Or at least, that's what they claimed. Friends said he had been acting a little different in the weeks leading up to his death. More distracted, more private, more cautious, like he knew something, or was expecting something, but no one could say what. And then came another chilling discovery. A neighbor reported hearing something the night before. Not a scream, not a crash, but footsteps. Slow, steady, repeated, at a time when Daniel should have been asleep. At first, it didn't seem important, until investigators checked the timeline again and realized something disturbing. Those footsteps didn't match Daniel's movement pattern, meaning someone else may have been inside that house before anything happened, watching, waiting, or planning. And that changes everything, because now, this wasn't just about what happened during the crime. It was about what happened before. And that's where the case takes a darker turn. Because when detectives finally pulled the full data from Daniel's phone records, they found something that made the entire situation even more unsettling. A pattern. Not random calls. Not accidental contact. A repeated connection to the same unknown source. Late at night. For days. Maybe weeks. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Right before his death. As if whatever was coming had finally arrived. And that leaves us with a question that still hasn't been answered. Was Daniel afraid, or was he expecting this? Because everything about that crime scene suggests one thing. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't random. This was something that built over time. Something quiet. Something hidden. Something that slowly crept into his life until it was too late. And in the next part, we start uncovering who or what might have been behind it. Because once investigators followed that lead, they stepped into something far more complex than a single crime scene. Something that reaches beyond one house, one man, one night, and into a story that still doesn't have a clear ending. If you think you know what happened so far, trust me, you don't. And if you're still here, make sure you stay with me. Because what comes next is where this case truly begins. If you thought this case was strange before, this is where it stops feeling like a single incident and starts looking like something much bigger. Detectives didn't waste time. That unknown number showing up again and again in Daniel's phone records, it became their top priority. Because patterns don't lie, and this pattern was too consistent to ignore. Every call came late at night. Almost the same time, almost the same duration. Not long conversations, just a few minutes, sometimes less, enough to exchange something, but not enough to explain it. When investigators pulled cell tower data, they expected at least a rough location. They got nothing. The signal bounced. not randomly, but strategically. Different towers, different areas, as if whoever was using that phone knew exactly how to avoid being tracked. That's not normal behavior. That's intentional. And it told detectives something important. This wasn't amateur. Whoever was on the other end of those calls knew what they were doing. Then, they went deeper. They subpoenaed additional digital records tied to Daniel's account's email, cloud backups, app activity. At first, it looked clean. Too clean. And that's what raised suspicion. Because in real life, no one is that tidy digitally. There are always traces, old logins, forgotten files, random searches. But Daniel's digital footprint had gaps, clean gaps, like sections had been carefully removed. And then they found it, a fragment, not a full message, not a complete file, just a leftover piece of data buried in a temporary folder. Most people would have missed it, but forensic analysts didn't. It was part of a message thread, encrypted, partially corrupted, but one line was still readable. Did you see it too? That was it. No context, no name, no explanation. Just that sentence. And suddenly, the case shifted. Because now investigators weren't just asking who Daniel was talking to. They were asking what he might have seen, and whether that had anything to do with what happened in that house. They tried to reconstruct the rest of the conversation, but whoever deleted it knew how to do it properly. This wasn't a simple delete and empty trash. This was layered removal, overwritten sectors, scrubbed metadata. Again, intentional. Again, controlled. At this point, detectives started building a profile not of a suspect but of a behavior pattern. Careful, patient, technically aware, and most importantly, someone who had access. Because there was still one problem they couldn't ignore. No forced entry. That detail kept coming back, over and over, like a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit anywhere else. So they shifted focus again. Who had access to Daniel's home? Friends? No keys. Family? Lived out of state. Neighbors? No reason. But then, something small came up during a routine follow-up interview. A delivery driver. Nothing unusual at first. Daniel had received a package 2 days before his death. Standard shipment. Nothing flagged. But when detectives checked, there was no package in the house. No box. No contents. Nothing. Just the delivery confirmation. Signed, Daniel. Or at least, that's what the record said. They tracked down the driver, asked him to walk through that delivery again. And his response? That was a weird one. Not alarming, not urgent, just weird. He said Daniel seemed distracted when he answered the door. Kept looking over his shoulder, like someone else was inside. But when the driver asked if everything was okay, Daniel just nodded. Signed quickly. Took the package. Closed the door. End of interaction. At least, that's what it looked like. But now, that detail mattered. Because if someone was already inside the house that day, that changes the entire timeline. It suggests something had already begun. Before the final night, detectives tried to identify the package. Tracking number led to a third-party vendor. Generic name. No clear business footprint. Payment method? Prepaid card. Of course, another dead end. Or at least, it looked like one. Until a deeper financial audit revealed something unexpected. Daniel had used a similar prepaid card just days earlier to purchase something online. Same type of vendor. Same lack of traceable identity. And then it clicked. This wasn't random. This was a connection. Daniel wasn't just receiving something. He was part of the exchange. But what kind of exchange leaves no physical evidence behind? No packaging. No product. Nothing. And why erase it so thoroughly? That's when investigators started considering something they hadn't before. What if this wasn't about a typical crime at all? What if the crime scene wasn't the beginning, but the result? Because everything pointed to one idea. Something had been introduced into that house. Something small. Something easy to remove. Something worth hiding. And possibly worth killing for. As this theory developed, detectives revisited the crime scene again, this time with a different approach. Not looking for signs of struggle, not looking for weapons, but looking for absence. What should have been there, but wasn't. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain areas of the house had been disturbed more than others, not randomly. Specifically, the living room, the hallway, and one corner of the bedroom, all connected by that faint mark on the floor. That dragging mark. Now it started to make sense. Something had been moved, but not just anything. Something specific. Something someone didn't want left behind. Then came another detail, one that almost got overlooked. Daniel's security system logs. Remember, the cameras had been disabled, but the system itself still recorded activity. Timestamps, on and off triggers, door sensors, motion detection. And in those logs, there was a moment, a single window of time, where everything went silent. Not turned off, not triggered, just nothing. For nearly 47 minutes. In a house equipped to detect movement, that's impossible, unless the system was overridden internally, which brings us back to the same question again. Access. Whoever did this wasn't guessing. They knew where things were. They knew how things worked. They knew how to move inside that house without making noise, without triggering alarms, without leaving obvious traces. And that level of familiarity? It's hard to fake. So now detectives had two possibilities. Either Daniel trusted the person responsible, or he didn't realize the danger until it was too late. Neither option is comforting. But one of them is far more disturbing. Because if he trusted them, that means the threat wasn't outside. It was already inside his life. And maybe had been for a while. Investigators went back through his recent interactions again. This time, looking at behavior, not just data, and they found something subtle. But important. In the days leading up to his death, Daniel had canceled plans, ignored calls, avoided certain people. That's not random. That's withdrawal. That's someone pulling back, possibly out of fear. Hors caution. Or both. And then came the moment that changed the direction of the case again. A second fragment of data, recovered from a backup server that hadn't been fully wiped. This one clearer, more direct. 2 lines. You shouldn't have kept it. Followed by, now it's too late. No signature, no name. But the tone? Not friendly, not casual. This was a warning. Or maybe a threat. And now, everything started to align. The missing item, the erased data, the unknown caller, the stage scene, the silent 47 minutes. It all pointed to one possibility. Daniel had something he wasn't supposed to have, and someone came to take it back. But here's where it gets even more unsettling, because despite all this, there was still no clear suspect, no face, no identity, just behavior, just patterns, just fragments, and a crime scene that still didn't fully make sense. Because even if someone came to retrieve something, why stage the scene? Why move the body? Why stay in the house longer than necessary? Unless there was something else, something they were looking for, something they didn't find. And that possibility? It opens the door to a much bigger question. What if Daniel wasn't the only one involved? What if this wasn't just about him, but about something he was connected to? Because in the next part, detectives uncover a link that expands this case far beyond one house, far beyond one victim, and into a network of events that may have been happening right under everyone's nose. And once you see that connection, you won't look at this case the same way again. If you're still following this, stay with me, because we're just getting to the part where things stop being coincidence. By now, detectives weren't just working a murder case anymore. They were chasing a pattern. And patterns like this don't stay contained. They spread quietly until someone finally notices. The breakthrough didn't come from inside Daniel's house. It came from somewhere else entirely. Another case file. Different city, different victim, different timeline. But when one analyst cross-referenced the data, something clicked. Same type of prepaid phone activity. Same short, late-night calls. Same sudden stop in communication. Right before the incident. At first, it felt like a coincidence. But then they looked closer. That second victim, also described as quiet, private, routine-driven, no obvious enemies, no forced entry at the scene. And just like Daniel, signs that something inside the home had been moved, but not taken. Now, it wasn't just strange. It was connected. And once they started digging, more cases began to surface. Not dozens, but enough. Enough to form a pattern you couldn't ignore. 3 different states, 4 similar scenes, all with the same underlying details, missing items with no clear identity, partial digital wipes, and that same eerie sense that someone had been inside longer than necessary. This wasn't random violence. This was targeted, controlled, repeated, and suddenly, Daniel's case wasn't the center anymore. It was just one piece of something bigger. A task force was formed, quietly. No media attention, no public statements, because the last thing investigators wanted was to alert whoever was behind this. They began mapping timelines, looking for overlaps, shared contacts, anything that tied the victims together. At first, nothing. Different jobs, different lifestyles, no shared social circles, no obvious connection. But then they shifted perspective. Instead of asking how the victims knew each other, they asked a different question. What did they all have that someone else wanted? That's when the financial records came back into focus. Across all 4 cases, there were traces of similar transactions. Prepaid cards, third-party vendors, small purchases, nothing that would stand out on its own. But together, they formed a pattern. Each victim had bought something untraceable, something that didn't officially exist. No receipts tied to real companies, no customer support, no product listings, just transactions and silence. And then those items disappeared. Every time, as if they were never meant to be kept. Investigators began to suspect an underground exchange. Not drugs, not weapons, something else. Something smaller, something digital, or highly specialized. Because whatever it was, people were willing to risk everything for it. Even murder. Then came the most unsettling discovery yet. One of the earlier victims before Daniel had a surviving contact. Someone who had received similar calls, but cut off communication before anything happened. This person wasn't easy to find. They had changed numbers, moved states, tried to disappear. But when investigators finally tracked them down, their reaction said everything. They were scared, not cautious, not hesitant, scared. At first, they refused to talk, said they didn't know anything, said they wanted no part in it. But after hours of reassurance, they finally gave in. And what they described shifted the entire case. They said the calls always started the same way. Short, direct, no introductions. Just a question. Do you still have it? No explanation. New context. And if you asked what it was, the call would end. Then another would come later. Some question. Over and over. Until one day, the tone changed. Les passions. More aggressive. More urgent. And then, a warning. You shouldn't have kept it. Those exact words. The same phrase recovered from Daniel's deleted message. That wasn't coincidence anymore. That was confirmation. The survivor said they got rid of the item immediately after that. Didn't sell it. Didn't return it. Just got rid of it. And after that, the calls stopped. No visits. No threats. Nothing. Which raised a critical point. The victims who died didn't get rid of it. They kept it. Whatever it was. And that decision may have sealed their fate. Now detectives were closing in on something real. No that person. Not yet. But a system. A process. An operation that relied on anonymity, precision, and fear. And it was working. Because even now, they didn't know what the item was. Not exactly, but they had a theory. Something rare, something limited, something distributed in a controlled way through untraceable channels. And once it was out there, it had to come back, no matter what. That would explain the behavior, the patience, the escalation, and eventually, the violence. But there was still one major problem. If this was organized, where was it coming from? Because operations like this don't just appear. They have structure, supply, distribution, and someone at the top, someone who never shows their face, never makes direct contact, never leaves a trace. So, investigators did something risky. They decided to reverse the pattern. Instead of waiting for another victim, they tried to enter the system. Using the financial trail, they recreated one of the transactions. Same type of prepaid card, same vendor structure, same digital pathway, and they waited. At first, nothing happened. Hours passed, then a day, then another, and just when it seemed like a dead end, the phone rang. Not a known number, not even a full number, just a restricted signal, the kind that doesn't show up on caller ID. They recorded everything, answered carefully, and then they heard it. A voice, calm, neutral, unfamiliar. And the question, did you receive it? No introduction, no explanation, just like before. But this time, the roles were reversed. Investigators were inside the conversation, inside the pattern. And what happened next changed everything. Because when they tried to push for more information, the voice didn't react, didn't hesitate, didn't get angry. It simply said, "Then you already know the rules." And the call ended, just like that. No trace, no callback, gone. But now, they had something they didn't have before. Proof. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated. This was active, ongoing, and highly controlled. And if that voice was part of the same system that led to Daniel's death, then they were closer than ever, but also in more danger than they realized. Because stepping into a system like that means you're no longer just observing, you're visibly. And if there's one thing this case has shown over and over again, it's that whoever is behind this doesn't like loose ends. And in the next part, everything comes to a head. Because investigators finally uncover what that missing item might be. And once they do, the reason behind these twisted crime scenes becomes impossible to ignore. Stay with me, because the final piece of this puzzle is the most disturbing one yet. At this point, investigators knew they were no longer chasing a theory. They were inside something real, something active. And whatever this operation was, it had rules, clear rules. Follow them. You walk away, break them, and you don't. So when that call ended with, "You already know the rules," detectives realized something chilling. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a test, a system built on compliance. And Daniel, he didn't comply. Now the pressure was on to identify the missing piece, the thing every victim had received, and then refused to give back. Because until they understood that, nothing else would fully make sense. Forensic teams went back through every recovered fragment of data, every corrupted file, every partial log, and finally, they found it. Not directly, not cleanly, but enough to form a picture. The item wasn't large. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't something you'd recognize immediately, because on the surface, it looked ordinary, like a piece of tech, something small, portable, easy to overlook, but inside it, that's where things changed. Encrypted storage, hidden partitions, and data that wasn't meant to be accessed without a specific key, a key none of the victims had, which raised the question, why send it to them at all? And that's when the final theory came together. This wasn't a sale. It wasn't a delivery. It was distribution, controlled distribution. These items were being placed into the hands of random, low-profile individuals. People like Daniel, People who wouldn't draw attention. People who wouldn't ask too many questions. At least, not at first. Because the real purpose wasn't for them to use it. It was for them to hold it. Temporarily. Like a relay. Like a human storage point. Until someone came to retrieve it. Clean. Untraceable. Invisible to traditional tracking. It was a system designed to move something valuable without ever leaving a direct trail. And the moment someone broke that chain, the system corrected itself. Forcefully. Now, everything made sense. The calls. The warnings. The escalation. You shouldn't have kept it. Because keeping it was never part of the deal. But Daniel did. And that's where everything went wrong. Investigators believe he got curious. Tried to access what was inside. Maybe he succeeded partially. Maybe he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And once that happened, he wasn't just a link in the chain anymore. He was a risk. And risks get removed. That explains the precision. The lack of forced entry. The time spent inside the house. Whoever came for that device knew exactly where it was. Knew exactly what they were looking for. And when something didn't go according to plan, they adapted. The scene was altered. The timeline manipulated. Not to confuse police, but to buy time. Time to recover what mattered. Because in the end, that's all this was ever about. Not the victim. Not the scene. The item. Always the item. But here's the part that still unsettles investigators to this day. In Daniel's case, they never found it. Not in the house. Not in the surrounding area. Not anywhere. Which leaves only two possibilities. Either the person who came for it took it successfully, or Daniel hid it somewhere no one has found. And if that second possibility is true, then whatever was inside that device is still out there, unaccounted for, unprotected, and possibly still being searched for. Because cases like this don't just end. They pause. They shift. They wait. The task force quietly shut down the active investigation months later. No public announcement. No official explanation. Just silence. But internally, the case was never closed. It was labeled something else. Ongoing. Unresolved. Sensitive. Because the truth is, they still don't know who's running this operation. They still don't know how far it reaches. And they definitely don't know how many more people have been part of it without even realizing it. Think about that for a second. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives, receiving something they don't understand, being watched without knowing. And the moment they step out of line, everything changes. That's what makes this case different. It's not just what happened inside that house. It's what it represents. A system that exists in the background. Quiet, but it's easy. And almost impossible to detect unless something goes wrong, like it did with Daniel. And maybe that's why this crime scene felt so twisted. Because it wasn't supposed to be seen. It wasn't supposed to be investigated. It wasn't supposed to exist in the open. But for one brief moment, something slipped. A mistake. A delay. A decision. And that gave investigators just enough to realize this isn't over. Not even close. So the next time you hear about a case that doesn't make sense, no forced entry, no clear motive, no obvious suspect, you might want to ask a different question. Not who did it, but what was really being moved behind the scenes. Because sometimes the crime isn't the point. It's just what happens when the system breaks. And if you made it this far, I want to hear what you think. What do you believe Daniel found? Do you think the item was recovered? Or is it still out there? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real cases, hidden details, and the kind of truths most people never hear, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next story might be even closer to reality than this one.